Hello, and welcome to the inaugural Futurebuild Podcast, where we talk to inspiring people that are making a positive change to the built environment. And I'm absolutely honoured this week to be joined by my first guest, Duncan Baker-Brown. Duncan is an activist, an architect, an academic, and an author, and a massive advocate of sustainable design. So, Duncan, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Martin. It's a real pleasure to be here. Thanks for the lovely introduction.
I want to delve into really what inspired to get you into architecture. So we can go back, and I know you've been in it for 30 years. So it's, if you can gaze back that far, but it'd be good to sort of talk around, what's inspired you, what's some of your inspirations.
Well, what got me into architecture initially was the magic of it all, because I came from quite a sort of humble background. We weren't well off by any means, and we lived in the countryside near Epping Forest in Essex, and we lived in this timber chalet. And I came across some drawings that my uncle had done, my mother's brother. He was an architect, and he lived in West London. We hardly knew him. And he'd done a scheme to transform this little chalet into something wonderful, into a sort of Japanese house. And I just thought, oh my God, it was the magic associated with that. You could transform the environment. So it's from about the age of 8. And then actually we went and stayed at his house. He had a house in the countryside in Buckinghamshire. And there was this photograph on the wall. He wasn't there. It was a sort of house. He was away, and we stayed at his house, me and my 2 brothers and my mum. And there was this photograph of this amazing building, which was actually turned out to be in South Kensington, a Georgian house with a shop. And it was his practice. And it was a plate glass. This is 1960s. The photograph was from plate glass front wall with a bit of Italian modernist furniture in the front. I was like, what is that? And amazingly, copper clad above. And I said, what's that, Mum? And she said, that's your Uncle Geoffrey's office. I was like, oh, wow. Oh, and his kids had cardboard furniture as well. So it was all these things. It was just the magic of it from about the age of 8. So from then onwards, we lived in the countryside, and I was always aware of environmental issues right from the beginning. So I either wanted to be a gamekeeper or an architect for a little bit.
And I know you studied part-time as well in architecture, and I think that's given you a little bit of a unique perspective on things as well.
Yeah. I mean, I was going to study full-time at Bath. I had a place there, but I wanted that deferred by a year so I could go and do a foundation course in art. And during that year, I didn't do the foundation course in the end because my parents separated and they left the county of Essex where I was from, so I couldn't get any grant. So I then went and worked in Holland Park for my uncle. And during that year, he persuaded me that studying part-time was a good thing. So I went to the London Met, sort of what was North London Polytechnic. And I thought it was amazing because it was a really vibrant course, and everyone, for me, the most vibrant part of it was the part-time students. And we had really good tutors. There was a guy called Florian Beigel and Philip Christou, and some really interesting architects. So it was also when we started really thinking about architecture and being quite radical, because it was while I was there, we put on our own lectures because we didn't think the lectures were very good at North London Poly at the time. So the Student Society put on their own lectures. So from an early age, I was working as well as studying. So that was a sort of 7-day week.
And you've always been an advocate of natural building products and obviously a circular approach now. What inspired that at that sort of university level and kept you inspired through your career?
in the 80s when I was studying architecture part-time, I couldn't quite get the things to mix. I was really just trying to get my head around what architecture was, and studying part-time, it was just always busy. But when I finished, I considered working for Greenpeace because I was really concerned about environmental issues at late 80s, early 90s. And instead of doing that, I went down to Brighton to do my master's postgraduate course full time. And there they just let me do what I want, which was to really focus on sustainability. And it was there in the early 90s when I was able to write a dissertation around these issues and do a lot of studying. And pretty quickly out of that situation, by 93, when I came out, I was working for an architect called Rick Mather. And at the time, he was working on the largest low-energy scheme in Europe, which was about 275 student flats at the University of East Anglia. And that was more around energy. So it was sort of super insulated buildings. But what was interesting there is that the buildings were heated by energy given off by the students. So it was all about understanding where the energy source was and redistributing it. And it's very simple construction, lots of load-bearing masonry with loads of insulation on the outside. But he didn't make a big deal out of it, which I thought was quite interesting because he was sort of cool and green, and you couldn't really be that in those days. So that was really interesting for me. But then while I was working for him, then the guy that became my partner for 25 years, Ian Mackay, and I, we'd both graduated from Brighton, and we hadn't quite done our final qualifications, but we entered the RIBA's House of the Future competition in 1993, and we won it. And that was where we were at. The next year we were able to build it, and that's where we were sort of majoring on natural materials. And so we were in our late 20s, and we built this thing. Pretty quickly after that, we formed a practice and entered. We kept winning competitions. We won about 6 competitions, including being part of the Greenwich Millennium Village team in the late 90s. So that was quite exciting. But what was coming along then is more issues around buildings as material banks for future buildings and designing out waste on site. So lots of closed loop circular economy ideas were coming on board. And then into the noughties, our practice was really majoring on doing that, but with organic natural materials.
Was it always your ambition to start your own practice? I mean,
No.
Okay. I didn't know if that was a way of sort of satisfying your need for that radical thinking as well, and sort of doing things differently.
No, I mean, if you'd asked me in 1993, if someone said you'll end up being a director at Rick Mather Architects, I would have been really happy, because it was a practice that was doing relatively large projects, and we're tackling environmental issues. So, to be honest, winning the competition gave me an unexpected opportunity. And so what's happened with my life, I've been lucky enough to sort of have something like Future House, as we called it, happen, and then suddenly there's other options that I never even thought of. So in 1994, the University of Brighton asked me to teach. I'd only been there for 18 months as a master's student, didn't really know anybody that well, and because all my friends were in London. But they asked me to teach because I had built this House of the Future. So I pretty quickly did teaching for 2 days a week and set up a research unit with other people called Research into Environment and Design, called RED, which still exists actually, but it's at other universities. So I didn't know I was going to do that. I didn't know what research was, really. I didn't know what being an academic was. And, I was asked to write a lecture series on sustainable design for the University of Brighton in 94, 95. So it's all been a bit of a surprise, to be honest.
I always talk about the sort of the changing role of architects, and I think in the intro I said you're all the A's. You're an architect, an activist, an author, an academic. Do you feel that's the sort of the modern way that architects are going? Is there a need to do more than simply architecture?
Well, when I started out in architecture, it was about 1983. I started working for my uncle, and we actually worked in the same road as Richard Rogers' practice then. It's Princedale Road in Holland Park. And we used to see him and his partners. There was only 6 of them or something. This is around about the time they were doing the Lloyd's building. And they would be in the pub, the same pub as us, at lunchtime. And so I got sort of wind of that and understood what they were trying to do, and realised that at the time, and the reason I'm going back that far is that those high-tech guys, they didn't have the supply chain to create their buildings. So it was quite well known that a number of them, like Michael and Patty Hopkins, they built up their own factories to create the modular systems to create their buildings. And so I sort of realized that sometimes you need to sort of create the environment to build your environment. Yeah. And I think that's what we're, fast forward to now, I think that's what's happening at the moment. With my sort of, it has been 30 years of solid research practice and teaching. And what we realized when we did the House of the Future is that there was a lot more research that needed to happen. We were, this was an off-grid building. One of the most innovative things about it, though, was the fact that it had an office under the same roof as the house, but it was separated by a bridge. So you actually felt like you went to the office in the morning. And that was seen as the biggest carbon-saving device, despite all the other things we were doing. I mean, it's basically built to passive house standards. But that's when we realised you needed to think a bit at a larger scale, think globally, act locally, sort of thing. And the Rio Summit in '92 had only just happened, so we were thinking like that. But that's when we realised we needed to do research. And so getting the opportunity to teach, I didn't need to set up a research unit immediately, but I realised there was a lot of research. So some of these opportunities have been like opening a door into a room and you'd expect it to be full of people and it's actually empty. You're like, oh, there's no one else doing that research, or not many. So, you know, by the time it was the late 90s and we were doing the Greenwich Millennium Village, Ian Mackay and I, we were in our late 20s. We were running the innovation task force, that's what it was called, for the Greenwich Millennium Village. We were visioning what urban sustainability was like. We were kids.
Does it ever frustrate you that, you know, over those 30 years, you know, you've developed the innovations, or you've seen the innovations firsthand that can solve, you know, a lot of the challenges that we have now, and we're still talking about this? They just haven't scaled, I suppose. What's the sort of the one thing that you're surprised hasn't scaled as rapidly as it should have done?
Well, I think the whole idea of low carbon architecture and the built environment, I'm surprised that just isn't a thing. Because, you know, when we did it, when we built Future House, it was a public event, not the building of it, but it was open to the public as part of 30 homes that were built, 30 different homes. And it was open for 6 weeks. We had 66,000 people through Future House. And at the time, I remember people coming up to us saying, well, in the 70s, we did this. When there was the oil crisis, OPEC crisis, all that, we did this. There's nothing new about this. And we're like, so we're not saying it's new. We're just sort of reminding people it can be done. So, it is bizarre. I mean, for me, I think what I've done is spent, especially the last 10 years, I've really gone looking for it. So it feels like there's a lot going on, and I think there is a lot going. It's certainly different to the 90s and the noughties. We're in a world where there's not really that much climate denial now. And I think a lot of people can see the benefit in building in a low carbon way. You know, we've got the built environment's too expensive to heat, too expensive to occupy. Then we need to insulate it, or and everybody's aware of, you know, we've just had 14 consecutive months of sea temperatures off the scale. You know, there's a lot of scary stuff happening now. And I'm really, I feel quite positive about the sea change that is happening. What I hadn't spotted was the fact that our politicians would be, ignoring that. I mean, feeling like they have to ignore it, that's for me, you know, back in the mid-90s, our politicians weren't ignoring it. It just was one of the many issues they were talking about.
I do agree with you, because it feels like time and time again we get these exemplar buildings, we get these exemplar projects. We had the Milton Keynes Expo, for example. You have, you know, the Innovation Village at the BRE. You know, time and time again, leading architects are building these, showing it's possible. You know, code level 5, code level 6, zero carbon homes. But there isn't the mass adoption. I would say, and I hope you don't disagree, that you're sort of a bit of a figurehead, you know, within the industry for this and pushing this forward. Is that something that sits easy with yourself?
I guess so, because it feels like I'm in the same room, but there's just more people joined me. So, I mean, and that's not being egocentric about it. I mean, literally in the 90s, there was 1 or 2 things to do with sustainability a year. Now there's 10 things a day. So there's always been other people who are sort of pioneers as well, but now it feels like there's a lot more of an intelligent, quicker conversation, because there's so many different people looking at it from so many different angles. So the whole concept of humans existing on the planet in harmony with the natural world is really critically analyzed now. So, you know, for example, when people say, I'm going to do the most sustainable housing scheme in the world, and all that, we're way past all of that. That's just rhetoric. So I think what's exciting about now, compared with the past, is we do have the sort of digital tools to measure what success looks like. And when you're carbon counting, and especially if you're thinking in terms of embodied carbon, the amount of stuff that goes into making a building in the first place, if you're counting that as well, you can't hide that. And I think that's quite exciting. I feel like we've got the data at our fingertips to do it properly.
I think in architecture as well, there's a real groundswell and a real movement around deep green. And I think, and you're involved in many of the groups, but we talk about activism. Sometimes, at government level, or depending on what paper you read, it's seen as a real negative. But I think in the built environment, there's a lot of positive activism. And I know you're quite involved in a couple of groups, Architects Declare and ACAN, and various actually RIBA groups as well. Do you feel that that's a positive thing? That's really pushing.
Yeah, I think for me, since about 2019, and maybe because of lockdown, people had time to think. But for me, one of the big moments was in about 2020, early 2020 in lockdown, was the publication of Letty's Climate Emergency Design Guide. And Letty, then being the London Energy Transformation Initiative, is so successful. It's now just the Low Energy Transformation Initiative because it's national. And I was so surprised at the clarity of intent of this document. And also who'd bought into it. It's just like all the different institutions. It was cross-industry. And then I saw it filter into RIBA stuff and RICS and everybody. And I was like, how has this happened? And then by accident, the editor of that first document, Clara Beganall-George, I had to I was a co-judge on some awards. And I got to talk to her for 3 days while we're looking at these different buildings. And she said 1,000 people had been involved in that document. So that for me was a game changer, because the silos had been crossed and broken, and there was a sort of whole life carbon descent plan, and there it was. And then the RIBA 2030 Climate Challenge bought into that, then I struck E, and I said, everyone, and RICS simultaneously said, yeah, we're behind that. And so for me, that's when it's getting real. And now out of that, we've now got the emerging UK net zero carbon building standard, which hopefully is going to be this sort of kit of parts and set of rules that the building industry can apply to develop a low carbon approach to building things.
I was going to ask you about that, because for me that feels like one of the great moments actually that silos are coming down. I think as an industry we're sometimes guilty of doing everything in silos. The architects will do something over here, and the engineers will do something over here, and the house builders, etc. But I think that initiative is probably one of the first times that the major institutions have all come together.
It is, and it's really exciting. I find it really exciting because everybody's got such a lot of knowledge that when you see it all in the room or around the table, you just feel so powerful. And I really like the fact that we've got to rely on surveyors now who measure stuff, because we want the data. In my world of the circular economy, we're involved in projects now where buildings that are having to come down are being deconstructed instead of demolished. And it's the surveyors that are measuring the potential quantities of resources coming off that deconstruction site. It's the surveyors that are measuring the embodied carbon. It's Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors that are giving us the updated embodied carbon figures. And I really like that. And I also really like the way that it's the structural and civil engineers that are actually steaming ahead at the moment in terms of giving you embodied carbon sort of design options for your structural design and things. I really enjoy that. It feels like there's some energy under sort of this desire to have this sort of minimal negative impact on the planet.
So if academic wasn't enough, and architecture and activism, you're also an author.
Yeah.
And I know you've got a couple of books coming out. This isn't what the podcast is about today, by the way. But I know you've got a couple of books coming out. But you want to just tell us about those? And obviously you're known for the Reuse Atlas. Which, if people haven't read it, you've got to.
Well, thank you for that. I mean, the Reuse Atlas was first published by the RIBA in 2017, and it's subtitled A Designer's Guide Towards a Circular Economy. And it takes you through 4 steps towards the circular economy, and it's the first step is the most basic thing. So there's lots of case studies around recycling projects, and then a whole sort of section on reuse projects, and then the third section is on what I call just reduce, but it's where you're doing what you normally do but hardly using any stuff. How do you do that? And then the final chapter is all around projects that are demonstrating proper circular economy principles. Now, when I did it in 2017, I had to draw from product design, food industry, fashion, as well as some built environment. But we really, as the built environment, were learning from the others.
I say, was that because there wasn't enough happening in the
There wasn't that much happening, no. I mean, I had my own waste house project that we built in 2014, but that was a sort of one-off, weird sort of polemic of it's a permanent building, but, it's not a normal thing. And, but now, I mean, the good news is that Reuse Atlas is coming out this September, but it's been delayed by about 2 or 3 years. And that's because there's so many good new case studies. So everyone that's a case study in the new book, which is a lot physically bigger, and it's got 40 case studies instead of 25, and 35 of those are new case studies. It's like a new book, really. But the good news was that I would interview someone, and then they'd say, well, I'd be interviewing them about Project X, and they'd say, yeah, well, Project X is all right, but look at this YZ project we've got. And so it just kept mushrooming. So that's why it's been delayed. But that's good. And it's just about all architecture this time. And that just speaks volumes. And the brief this time was to not look at unusual pavilion type projects or something, but to look at projects in the commercial world, in the real world. And that's what I've done. So some projects I'm only selecting, for example, a facade that I'm interested in because it's 9 stories of curtain wall system that's been deconstructed, cleaned up and reassembled. And the client's a British Land, so wow, they're doing it. So how do you get the warranty for that? So it's, in a way, it's a lot more helpful. So I think it's still going to be inspirational, but I think it's also going to help people who are really now trying to do this because, in the UK, there's a lot of cities that have circular economy route maps now, and they're putting that language into the briefs. They're commissioning buildings that need to respond to these aspirations. So we need to see how it's done.
It's really interesting because I think we spoke a lot about this. Is a lot of it was coming out of Amsterdam and the Netherlands in particular that were leading on that. I know now in Belgium, especially around their new build or their refurb, it has to be considered from the planning stage as well. So it's good to hear that the UK are leading on that.
I mean, I think the UK are giving it some good thought and installing sort of guidelines. In Amsterdam, and the Netherlands, they've got the laws, which is what we need in the UK next. But the reason that I think it has happened in the Netherlands, and obviously a lot of the case studies I've got in the book are from the Netherlands, is because they've got really ambitious zero waste targets for 2035. And so that's impacted on everything in a city. And obviously the built environment's a big thing in a city around waste generation. So I think that's where we are now. And that's, I'm a fan of the forthcoming net zero carbon building standard, but I really do think we've got enough guides now. We now need the legislation. Those guides need to impact on building regulations and whether it's tax legislation or whatever. We need to, create and sustain a sort of reuse retrofit industry, and we don't have that at the moment.
And going back to your own practice, is these things that you find, do clients come and find you because of this thinking, or is this something that you can impact and guide clients along the way? How does
we've had 1 or 2 clients where I think, have you not seen the website? Most of our clients now are coming to us because they feel like we can take on those issues and deliver a building. We do a lot of residential work, and most of our clients are that way inclined. But the way the practice is working now is that we're working on bigger projects again, which reminds us of the late 90s when we were the sustainability consultants on bigger projects, and now we're advising bigger teams on how they can apply circular economy principles to their project, whether that's how do you design a new building to be a material store for the future, or how do you do a resource map to ascertain the resource potential on the site and in the region, and how can you really reuse a brick or a raised floor tile or whatever it is.
Is that a sign of the changing role of an architect? I know you've used the word consultant quite a lot in consultancy, and you talk there about local authorities trying to develop their own whether it's a net zero or circular roadmaps or route maps. Do you find yourself now doing more consultancy work as a practice?
Yeah, that's certainly the area that's growing really fast at the moment, so that's quite exciting, and I feel quite confident with that because over the last 10 years I've had a good look. I mean, that's the bit, by the way, that's the good bit about teaching research and practice. I can be being paid to go to a conference and meet and go and interview people to create a book or whatever. So that is a real, an honor to have that role. I mean, it is a bit exhausting sometimes, but when it works, you really are doing proper research and R&D. And that means I can feel like I'm speaking with quite an authentic voice when I'm advising people on how to get the best sort of low embodied carbon footprint for a building, because if you're reusing what's there, whether you're keeping the building that you thought you were going to demolish or whether you're deconstructing the building you thought you were going to demolish, either way, you're dramatically reducing the embodied carbon. But, there's not many people that have done it, not since before the Second World War anyway. So for me to be able to say, oh, that's a bit like and point to another project. It might be one in our office, or quite often it's something that someone else is doing. And what's happening in the UK now is that a lot of people are having a good go. So there's more and more precedents in the UK which you can point to, which is great.
And where do you think we sit really around sort of innovation and, what's driving this at the moment? We've had massive advances now in the uptake and development of natural building products.
Yeah.
What do you see the sort of the key drivers really to push this forward?
Well, I think there's an understand. For example, with natural materials, I mean, we've got things like biodiversity net gain. So I think we're understanding now that we can't take the natural world for granted. It needs a little bit of help. I mean, I think with the first lockdown we saw, when we properly locked down in 2020, we saw the natural world pretty quickly after what appeared to be weeks recovering, which was incredible, really inspiring for people like me that are worried about it all the time. So that was amazing. But also there's issues around well-being and health. And, when we did Future House in 1994, it was a plastic-free environment. It was organic paints, clay plasters, all this sort of stuff. And that was because when you insulate and seal a building so it's high performing in terms of low energy consumption, there's a tendency towards sick building syndrome, and that's because of all the plastics and synthetic materials that are used to create that sealed envelope. So from early on, we were trying to eliminate plastic insulation, plastic vapor control layers, whatever it was, and build with organic materials because they're healthier, bottom line, and we spend 95% of our time inside. But then we began to realize that if you're particular about the specification of these materials, you can be encouraging a sort of increase in biodiversity because of the particular timber you're using, which there's timber out there that if you specify, it actually increases the level of biodiversity than if you leave it alone. So it's that sort of thing. There's also waste streams from organic waste streams, we've done research projects looking at farm waste, agri-waste, and how you can turn that into insulation and all sorts of things. So it's huge potentials. I mean, the food industry is massive, and the waste streams from that, believe it or not, you can turn into products for the construction sector. So that's where the sort of research stuff has spun out again and again and again, and we've been involved in a lot of that sort of stuff. I mean, we're desperately trying to use mycelium insulation at the moment, but it doesn't have BBA certificate yet. But when it does, we'll use it. And, we've done a lot of work with the suppliers, so that's really exciting.
If you'd watched Clarkson's farm, which I'm a bit obsessed with, he grew mushrooms. And I think what was absolutely unbelievable, and it probably gives you the idea of how mycelium can scale rapidly as well, is how fast it grows. Yeah, it was that can really scale. If that can get BBA certification, that can be a real game changer.
Oh, exactly. And the great thing about mycelium over other sort of organic matters being turned into insulation or whatever, it doesn't require land. No. So that's the challenge you've got if you want to build with straw or hemp. The land might be being used for food stuff already. So that's where I'm really excited about mycelium.
Yeah, and it's sort of, the hemp side's really interesting because it's actually the processing and the machinery needed to process it. It's actually quite a hard, coarse material.
Yeah.
The factories to produce it at scale are extremely expensive.
Yeah. So there's a lot of investment.
No one's just doing it at scale at the moment. I think what's interesting from my perspective, we obviously run Futurebuild every year, is that time and time again, the most requested and seen brands are those offering natural building products. And my challenge is I just can't get enough of them at the show.
No.
But you're a massive advocate for those.
Well, I think, that's interesting. I think the issue we've had in the UK, and it might be a bit more UK specific, is understandable. But post Grenfell Tower disaster. There's it's pretty much a sort of, a moratorium on the use of timber, and the irony of that, plastic and aluminium burning, and then timber's the thing that's gets it in the neck as the world. So I think people are just really, in a way, understandably worried, and I think it's, it's a challenge for our industry to go back to government, whether it's Mayor of London or whoever, to prove that how timber can perform well in these situations. But so I think the whole sort of organic material thing is seen as a bit vulnerable. Not in terms of longevity and stuff. I mean, people say, well, doesn't timber rot? And then I take them to the Weald and Dowland Museum in West Sussex, near where I live, and there's 600-year-old timber buildings there. So it's about the way you detail it. But I think there's huge potential with creating regenerative forests that supply us with all sorts of timber products.
Yeah, and we were talking. It needs to come out of that artisan grand designs world and get into the mainstream.
Yeah,
and we were talking, over coffee before this about sort of plant-based offsite, and as maybe a future to that as well, and using some of those offsite technologies to accelerate the use of natural building products.
Yeah, and it's doable. I mean, a project we did in 2008 was called The House That Kevin Built, which is a sort of special version of the Grand Designs thing where Kevin was the presenter, and we were charged with creating a building off-site that could be assembled in 6 days. It was a house, and we did it. In fact, we did it in 5 days. We did day one twice for the cameras, and that was 90% of what that building was made of was different types of carbon-locking organic materials. And we sort of married those materials with computer technology, so precise routed ply or engineered timber, and so we sort of proved that fluffy organic stuff locking carbon could be precise, and it turned up on site and all clipped together, and it was amazing.
And we're seeing it now. There's so many different systems coming out. But it just needs to go beyond garden cabins. And that's and it is beyond that, but I think that's the big step, I think.
I mean, I think it is the big step, but there are so many benefits from using organic materials. I just think we just need to keep highlighting them. I'm saying that as someone that's focusing on showing how the inorganic nasty stuff can be reused, but that came from after about 15 years of doing school buildings, houses, whatever, using these organic materials. I mean, we did a 9-story office building, new build, which were all the insulation was timber fibre and sheep's wool and all that, and that was fine. But I just realised that there's this. I was looking in one direction at this sort of organic stuff, which is fair enough, but behind me there's this huge mound of waste being generated by the construction sector. I mean, in 2012, when we were thinking about doing what became the waste house, the statistic then was that the construction industry was throwing away one house worth of stuff every time it built 5 houses. And so that the ambition for that project, which we completed 10 years ago, 2014, was that we would prove that these waste flows of stuff from the construction sector wasn't waste at all. It was a valuable resource. And that's great. And that's why we then got into the whole circular economy thing. But then we're thinking about, well, what do you do moving forward? What is this all about? And what we're trying to look at is ideas around the fact that the sort of nasty, I call it nasty, but it's the material that we use all the time, the high carbon, toxic stuff. We've got to sort of mine that and reuse it. You've invested in the carbon with the high carbon stuff. Treat that more as though it's more valuable, and reuse that. Learn how to deconstruct that and reuse it. Or if it's concrete and it's poured on site and in situ, you got to work with it. Just work with it. Do not smash it up. And then actually you can then start looking at the biosphere, the organics stuff, to supply the new materials. And we call the inorganic stuff the Anthropocene. I mean, we don't, geologists do, but this idea that there's this human-made layer of stuff that wraps the planet. We've got more than enough stuff already produced to rework again and again. And so you work with that, and then you import the new stuff as much as possible as the organic stuff.
Yeah, we don't need any more virgin material.
We don't. I start by saying, we close down all mines. We don't need. There's apparently more copper above ground than below. I heard that on more than one occasion at Futurebuild, so that's amazing. But that's apparently a reality. But we do know we've got a lot of stuff above ground, and it's just learning how to sort of rework that.
And I think there's been a big step change where, I think Barratt's announced that at their AGM that they want their suppliers now to actively reduce waste in terms of their packaging. We're seeing major clients now sign up to sustainable charters. That again, it's about the supply chain stepping up, and and they want that. We're seeing some of the major PIR insulators buy wood fibre insulation companies. Seeing a step change there as well. So I feel there's a real positive. And groundswell. Duncan, you're an extraordinarily busy man as we've done all that, and so I want to ask you as well. You've obviously going to take on another big challenge, which is running for RIBA president.
Yeah.
So that's, I don't know how you have the time.
Well, so if I'm successful with that, and I am running as one of the candidates this summer, something else will give. But to be the RIBA president would be a huge honour. But it is only a 2-year post. So, but the reason I'm going for it is I just really feel like the RIBA is in a position where it can make a lot of impact in the world that we're talking about. I mean, the RIBA has done a lot of work, as other institutions have, around giving its members the sort of guidelines and information so we can practice in a low carbon way. I've been on council since 2021. I chair the RIBA's Climate Action Expert Advisory Group. Actually, I co-chair it. Sorry, Mina. With Mina Hasman. Anyway, but I've been to the last 2 COPs representing the UK world of architecture. So what I've realised is the RIBA is very good at lobbying, and actually abroad, the RIBA, people just let you in if you say you're representing the RIBA. So for me, it's a huge opportunity. We've got amazing staffers at the RIBA, the people that write the 2030 climate challenge, et cetera, whether it's dealing with fire regs, EDI, whatever. We're all over it, and I've been really impressed with it as an institution. But I'm aware that post-COVID, we're sort of disengaged from our membership, our small practices. I teach. I was teaching at Master Studio yesterday. And the RIBA has sort of lost touch, I think, with academic environments and small practices. For me, they both feel equally disenfranchised. And I find myself saying, no, it's good. No, the people there are great. You need.
Let's touch on that. I mean, we talk about small practices. I think something like 95% of architects work for small practices or medium-sized practice, 10 architects and under.
Yeah.
What's the challenges at the moment for a small practice?
Well, today's challenge is actually just getting the work. The industry's been very choppy for the last year, but actually it's just got more and more expensive to be a small practice, and just something like professional indemnity insurance. For me, I don't know for everybody else out there, but for me, it's the premiums have trebled in the last 3 or 4 years. So just to practice as an architect, and then with new fire regs, etc., we don't get the cover that we used to get. So smaller practices can't bid for the work they used to be able to bid. The insurance cover isn't as good as it used to be, and it's 3 times as expensive. In addition to that, the National Building Specification (NBS) is unaffordable for a lot of practitioners when it didn't used to be. So we're sort of trying to find other ways to write specifications properly and having the support that the NBS used to give us. So we find it difficult to afford that. And then the RIBA, for me, with really good intentions, has got, if you want to be a conservation architect, you can be on their directory of conservation architects. You have to pay for that. If you want to be, what's going to happen next year or the year after is this idea of a lead carbon consultant, which would be great. You have to pay for that to be on that directory. The recent one is principal designer directory. Again, you pay for that. So you're paying to be a member of the RIBA. You've got to be a member of the ARB anyway, and you've got these other directories. So we've really got to do something different with the membership.
So what do you see
subscriptions?
Place in supporting young practices or small practices? Sorry.
Well, certainly, I think the cost of being a member's got to relate more to the size of practice, but also realise that at the moment it's overly complicated with having to pay for all these other directories. I think there should be just one subscription, and if you can prove that you should be on a directory, I'm not sure you should be paying for it, even though they'll say they've got to find the money. But it's just going to disenfranchise small practices. But what I think the RIBA's got is nearly 50,000 members. Yeah. And what's really exciting is like 14,000 are students. So what's the other group like that? That's incredible. And that's the thing that, by the way, when you go to the Netherlands a lot, the Royal Institute of Dutch Architects there, the BNA, they're like, wow, you're such a big organisation. You're so sort of powerful and influential. I'm thinking, well, over in the UK, we don't feel like that, but we are. And so what my ambition is to make the RIBA more relevant to all its members. That includes the educators and the academics and students. Really nurture those people as well as the small practitioners. And I want a better turnout at the elections, because there's headline news normally when a president is elected is how how few people voted.
It is shockingly low.
And so if we can get more than 4,000 people voting out of that 50,000 membership, that will be something I'm really excited about.
Yeah.
We want to engage our membership because, by the way, I don't know how else to put it, but I don't often bump into an architect that's not very good at what they do. Yeah. And I just think there's a huge potential for, that knowledge exchange. I mean, the thing I'm passionate about is actually thinking that the whole world of retrofit, is barely occupied by architects at scale. I mean, a lot of small practitioners, that's all we do. But the sort of low carbon, climate resilient retrofit, which is what I think we need to be doing, we need to engage all our members with that because it's a huge opportunity for work. And the retrofit industry is barely apparent yet, but I think it's going to be there, and we need to be sort of ready for it.
So do RIBA need to be promoting the profession more?
Yeah, completely. I think that's what we could be really good at. I think we should be promoting what added value that architects can bring to projects. We got a unique sort of training and a way of looking at things, and we need creative responses to challenges. And retrofit's got to be a lot more than just external wall insulation and solar panels. For a start, I've been involved in lots of schemes for social housing doing this. No one can afford to do that at the moment, but they can afford to do different. If you think creative, there's a different approaches to retrofit. And that's where we just want our best architects and designers involved. And you get everyone involved, you're going to get ideas that you can't even think of at the moment. And I think that's what the RIBA can do. It can shine the light on what its members do, but best practice with exhibitions, publications, but just really, really publicizing everything that we do, which I think is incredible. I don't think the membership need to do very much. I think the RIBA just needs to shine a brighter light on it.
We talk a lot about, maybe some of the challenges or obstacles or what's holding back the built environment, getting to, especially net zero or different, regs. What's the RIBA's position in lobbying? Where should it be focusing in its time?
I mean, without the RIBA, in my opinion, is pretty good at lobbying, but it lobbies around lots of issues. Whether it's around planning, the housing crisis, building safety, all these sorts of things. There's a lot going on in the background, which I've been really impressed with, and I don't really want to say much more than that. Otherwise, you're sort of, it's shining a light on some stuff that just needs to be happening in the background. But my point is that it can be doing that for its members a lot more, and I'm passionate about this, what I see as a new growth industry, which is the retrofit and adaptation of the existing built environment industry. And I think the RIBA can be part behind that. And I'm thinking in terms of, if embodied carbon is quantified, if it's legislated for, which there's been a carbon bill that's been presented in front by Tory MPs over the last 2 years on 3 occasions that's almost got through. If that had gone through, it's immediately in building regs, or pretty quickly in building regs. You're in a different world. If you're measuring embodied carbon, it's benchmarked for different building typologies. You're in the world of retrofit and reuse. Our industry, architects need to be ready for that. So we need to be doing it now, encouraging it now, promoting best practice.
Yeah. When we were setting up, we were talking to the podcast engineer, and we said, what do you do? I'm an architect, and it's always the same response: grand designs. And I think we need to get to the stage where architecture's a lot more than grand designs. And I remember a Futurebuild or an EcoBuild actually many years ago. We had Stephen Fry on stage, and he said architecture's the only art that is everywhere. And it's about bringing good design back as well. I remember a time when the Sterling Prize was hotly anticipated, was on Channel 4. The RIBA Gold Awards would come out. Even the Carbuncle Cup, which is the worst of architecture, would be in the Times. I think there is a need to re-promote the profession.
Yeah, I agree. I think, and the RIBA has substantial resources. We're about to spend multi-millions on refurbishing our HQ, which I support. 66 Portland Place needs that work done on it, and we can't get rid of it. It's held in trust. So, but it can come up with 50, 60 million pounds to do that. So we ought to be able to have a healthier PR budget, for want of a better word. But with the refurbishment and of Portland Place in mind, that's going to be closed for 2 or 3 years, maybe 3 or 4 years. It's a big project, and I think if I'm successful at running for president and I'm the president-elect for a year, I'll take over as president in September 2025, and the HQ might be closed then. So my idea is that, a bit like the FA when the Football Association did when Wembley closed. Suddenly what I'd really like is the regions to take it in turns hosting the big events, whether it's the Sterling Prize or the gold medal or whatever it is. They have the budget that central office normally has for 6 months. And then you can imagine in 3 or 4 years, you get around the regions. And that's an opportunity for regions really to show off what they're about. The RIBA's had this thing called LIFT funding, which is local initiative funding. And they give out grants of a couple of £1,000. And they've been to regions who, they've done hundreds of different things, which are great with sort of £2,000. But I'm just thinking if those regions then suddenly had the budget that central office normally has for an event, we could really highlight best practice in the region. They could curate a series of events, which would include what normally happens at Portland Place, but also then regional specific stuff.
So Duncan, let's glimpse into the future. You've done, you've won your election.
Yeah.
You've done your president-elect for a year. You've served your 2 years, and then you stand there and you're looking back. What's the impact that you would want to have achieved over those 2 years? What's the changes you would like to?
I'd like to have grown the membership by 10% at least. I think. That's just off the top of my head. If we could do more, that would be great. I think that's important because more members is more conversation. I'd want regions to feel like the RIBA matters for them and that and they matter for the RIBA. And I'd hope that we would have impacted on the government of the day, and that embodied carbon would be legislated for. And as soon as that happens, you've got a retrofit industry. And by the way, a lot of people are saying, don't call it retrofit. That's retrogressive. But what do you want to call it? It's we're adapting the existing built environment. We're creating, our future low carbon, climate resilient cities are with us. And we've got to make the new cities out of the old cities. And I would hope even after just 2 years of me being president, we'll be in that world.
So, touching on impact, I'm going to ask you some quick fire questions because impact's going to be our theme for 2025.
Yeah, good.
And the actions that we can take forward at Futurebuild. So, first of all, who's had the most positive impact on you in your career?
What, apart from you, Martin?
Apart from me, yes.
I say that glibly, but I've been involved with Futurebuild since 2013. I know, when it was called EcoBuild. But, in terms of people that have been impactful for me, inspirational. I would say that it's outside of architecture. James Baldwin, who was the black activist writer from the 50s, and then in the 60s it's someone else, and in the 70s it's someone else. 70s it's David Bowie. So, but then, my mother was really inspirational for me. It was my mother that accidentally scared me into being an environmentalist when I was 8. We lived in the countryside in Essex, and we were walking in this field up this hill, and I thought we were going deeper into the countryside. And when we got to the top of the hill, I said, "Mum, what's that?" And she said, "That's London." I could see the NatWest Tower from the field that I was in. It was a long way away, but I was like, "Whoa, that's scary," because I thought we were going out into the wilderness. So she said, "Yeah, one day it would only be the nature reserves that had nature in them." And I was like, "Whoa, that's scary." So from then I actually watched the M11 and M25 carve through bits of countryside. So my mum's pretty much up there, but it changes every week, to be honest. I mean, I was really, when ACAN was formed, I was like, I found my tribe, as it were, Architects Climate Action Network. I was just so excited when that happened, and I just thought they were amazing. And it's often, I teach, as you know, and it might sound corny, but it is the truth. It's often the young people that I find really inspiring.
Well, that leads on to my next question, actually. Who do you think is going to make the biggest impact going forward in the built environment? Who's that sort of future leader that you're seeing?
Well, there are people at the moment that I'm really impressed with, and they would be really perhaps embarrassed if I said it. But no, there are people who are really impactful at the moment. So Clara Beganall-George, who got Letty going. I mean, she'd say she was one of 1,000 people or whatever, but she was the editor of that first document. She then was involved with the rest, and she actually initiated the UK Net Zero Carbon Building Standard, and that's one person. And her vision has made those things happen. Yeah. And then you've got someone like Smith Mordack at UK Net Zero. That's the other thing. UK Green Building Council, the CEO there. I mean, Smith's hugely impactful. Yeah. I've gone to the last couple of COPs with Smith, and just so intelligent and all over it. So I'd say those two people.
They're making an instant impact.
Yeah, they are incredible.
You obviously, as you said, you've been to EcoBuild, Futurebuild many years.
Yeah.
What's one product, solution, technology that's had an impact in your working life?
one product.
It could be many.
Oh gosh, there's loads.
Don't have to give a brand name. There might be other.
No, but I tell you, this is going to sound a bit dull perhaps, but as soon as we started to map and quantify embodied carbon digitally, that has been a game changer. So the digital modelling of whole life carbon, so there's IES modelling, for example, and since we've been using that for the last 10 or 15 years, and showing a client a model that says, look, here's your existing building overheating. Here's another model when it doesn't overheat. This is what you have to do. It's incredibly impactful. And so to be able to work with the surveyors and the environmental engineers using that sort of modelling makes our life a lot more easier. I mean, we can be definitely gone are the days where you're an instinctively green architect. There's nothing, that's rubbish. You can be specifying, we like using sweet chestnut timber because you can use, it comes from local regenerative coppice woodlands. But if you just went away thinking, right, I've got to use sweet chestnut, and you find yourself in Brazil, you really need to have the data. So for me, it's more and more reliable data, and we're criticizing the data we've got already, and we need to do it there. So for me, it's the digital modelling.
So if you could ask government to do one thing that would create the most positive impact on the built environment, what would it be?
It would be to put embodied carbon, whole life carbon, into the building regulations.
Do you think you can see it happening?
Yes. I mean, from my point of view, if you've got the Tory government, it's literally less than a year ago that a Tory MP put in front of Parliament a 10-minute bill, which was the whole life carbon bill. It didn't get through. It got presented, though, by a Tory MP in the environment that, the sort of rhetorical environment that we're in at the moment. That's incredible. So imagine, with a different government next year, I would assume that will fly through. By the way, by then you'll have the UK Net Zero Carbon Building Standard as well to show government what they need to do and why that initiative would be worth doing.
So my son's middle name is Ziggy. So after Ziggy Stardust,
wow,
so big Bowie fan myself. So,
all right, this is another podcast. We've got another hour.
Exactly, we've got the studio for ages. No, but it's sort of what's a song that's had a defined impact on your life, and hopefully it's a Bowie one.
Really?
Yeah.
If you really want to, why not just not the well? The first song lyric I ever listened to was oh gosh, I'm going to forget it. It's David Bowie. What's the one? What was his second hit? What was his first hit?
I don't know. Idea.
What we? It's gone. Cut this.
Cut this bit.
Cut this bit. Okay. His most amazing vocal performance, I've never heard of anything like it, was when he sung Wild is the Wind. Oh, yeah. And so Nina Simone had done that. And he did it because he got friendly with her. And she literally said, why don't you have a go? So, and it's his best ever vocal performance. So that I would say that. But then actually his last album, Black Star, was just full of amazing records, where the album before was like really a bit dull and depressing. But his final album, right up to the last moments of his life, was incredible, and he was still going for it. And the stories what I sort of learnt from him was, is just do what you really believe in. I mean, I couldn't be doing this speaking. When I was a undergraduate student, my colleagues used to laugh at me because I got so nervous presenting. And that's because I didn't believe in what I was doing. I was learning, so I didn't believe that I was any good at an architect. I wasn't wanting to stand up there and say, this is great. But as soon as I got a cause and got focused, you can put me anywhere. As long as I'm talking about this sort of thing, I don't get nervous. But if I had to start talking about selling vacuum cleaners or something like that, I would be more nervous. But Bowie was always confident. But the best Bowie story I like is actually to do with Live Aid. And that's Harvey, what was his name? Harvey Goldstein, and Harvey Goldsmith. And he'd got, and it was with Bob Geldof, and they didn't really have any big stars wanting to do Live Aid. So they pretended Bowie was in. And as soon as they pretended Bowie was in, then they got the other people. And I have to say, when I'm curating events and trying to get speakers, it's like, yeah, we've got Malcolm Brown. We got Michael Braungart. He's definitely in, and then you get everyone else. So that's what I learned from Bowie, because I heard that from a Bowie story.
Obviously, you've got 3 books of your own. a book that's
I didn't mention the other one that's coming out really soon, which was based on a research project we did, which was called the School of Reconstruction. So that was it's meant to be a summer school down in Brighton, inviting students from 6 European countries, but because of COVID, we couldn't do it. So we did it as a digital thing. And the School of Reconstruction had 7 teams looking at reuse projects across the world. We actually ended up, because it was all online, we had students from Colombia and South America through to China and everything in between. And amazing team leaders, 25 grown-ups, as it were, with those 11 teams. That's now going to be a book. So and we got also other essays. So that's called the Pedagogies of, I can't even say it, Pedagogies of Reuse, and that's coming out in June or July. And then a reuse atlas, the Mark II, that's coming out in the autumn. So in a way, at one level, it looks like I've got the sort of teaching and the doing of reuse sort of sewn up, but far from it, really.
And one book that's not yours, that has had a defined impact on yourself?
Yeah, there's a book. It's called. It hasn't got a really good title, but it's an amazing book. So it's called Rebirding, and it actually tells the story of how the Romans left the English landscape depleted, and how then for the next from the 6th century until the 16th century, in subsistent farmers, small peasant farmers, we were all that. And how a sort of hugely rich biodiverse environment, including pelicans in Norfolk, was sustained by the way we worked the land. So, because everybody had a small farm, they all wanted water meadows, forests on their little patch of land. So you got this patchwork of biodiverse environment. And then, rather sadly, from the Enclosure Act in the 17th century onwards, it was the sort of mass extinction of species, which was deliberate. You know, we wiped out bald eagles in 30 years on purpose. And that's really depressing. But then he looks at how that's rebuilding again. So, for example, the Isle of Wight set free 13 pairs of bald eagles.
That's right.
And they are actually flying over where I'm in Sussex. Those bald eagles need such a lot of land that we see them. And now there's a load more. So we know how to exist in harmony with our planet. Let's just do it.
Yeah, if you're on the Isle of Wight, go to Newtown, and you can go to the bird watch there and try and see them. If not, you'll see some amazing wildlife out there as well.
So I mean, for me, that book's really it tells a bit of a gruesome story, but it's ultimately optimistic because it shows what we need to do. And the author, whose name I've forgotten at the moment, Benedict MacDonald. I've actually had correspondence with him, and we were thinking about doing some sort of book or a paper that looked at how you could have that sort of patchwork in cities as well. And I think that's, cities of our future. I really believe they're going to be where we grow food, where we're going to have biodiverse environments in our cities. We can coexist.
Yeah, we haven't touched on urban greening, but that's probably a whole another podcast.
Well,
last question for you.
Yeah.
And it's really, what would be your one piece of advice to a young architect starting out? Because you've sort of seen and done it all.
Yeah. One piece. Favorite and one. One piece of advice is stick with it if you love it. I mean, if it's a difficult subject to do, if you're only all right about it, if you're not passionate about it. I do often say doing bad architecture is as difficult as doing good architecture, actually, and I mean that really. It's a lot of hard work, whether you're going to get just about barely pass or do really well. There's no sort of easy option. So if you've got the energy for it, it is hugely rewarding, because it's, as Stephen Fry said, it's the one sort of art practice that is everywhere seen. If you've got the energy for it, just go for it. We need you.
Brilliant. Duncan, well, massive thank you for being the first guest on the new Futurebuild podcast. If you like this, please subscribe. We will be focusing on or featuring lots of more innovators, people with innovative thinking, disruptors, over the coming weeks. Thank you.